Today with Denis Glazkov, we will be talking about the architecture. We represent mobile open platform. I will talk generally about the company, and we'll have two parts. First part will be delivered by me, and the second part will be delivered by Denis. And I think after we will do the first part, Denis will take on. Open Mobile Platform works with mobile applications, working with Aurora OS. So our company works with the development of mobile operating system. We have offices in four main cities in Russia: Moscow, St. Petersburg, Innopolis, in Kazan. It's a very local, highly innovative city, and as well as the fourth city in Nizhny Novgorod. This will be our agenda for the presentation. So we'll talk about the Aurora OS first and foremost. Probably everybody used Android and iOS, but probably nobody heard about Aurora instead. We'll compare the security systems for different mobile operating systems, and then we'll compare and contrast them between three key metrics: Android, iOS, and Aurora. We'll get into the technical implementation of all those aspects for our operating system, and then we will move to the key part of this presentation. It will be the store applications, what kind of challenges we had, what kind of solutions we used. This presentation will end with a number of trusted sources, which we had when we worked with App Store, and then we will cover the future development of all these elements for future security causes. So now let us start with the Aurora operating system. First of all, this is a so-called completely domestic operating system, which has been in development for the 5 years with the efforts of the Open Mobile Platform. There are already 5 generations. It has been ported on a number of different devices, with more than 10 devices, more than 100 of partners. MDM solutions, SDK solutions. In terms of operating system itself, it is in compliance with all the state-of-the-art requirements in terms of the graphical representation, in terms of supporting hardware, software, sensors. Everybody's using, for example, NFC, Bluetooth, physical switches, which are required for microphones, cameras. Anything that is available on the phone is adapted to Aurora OS and is used in the system. It has its own browser, supporting digital encryption and supporting digital signature, which is very important if we are trying to work on the B2B market and we position ourselves as a secure operating system. The OS can be separated in 3 levels: app, UI, middleware, and applications. Here on the first part we have the main ecosystem, the main applications. Obviously, an operating system has to have some kind of basic fundamental application, some functionality, and we also use Qt. It has Linux nucleus under the hood, more than 1,800 of packages, both open source packages and our proprietary solutions, custom-made packages, still using Linux and using system disk, and everybody uses system disk too. We do not position ourselves as a distributive, we position ourselves as a platform, just like it's done by somebody who takes a ready-made distributive and they fine-tune it for their needs. basically the same set of packages remains. In our case, though, we develop our own ecosystem and our own mechanisms, including the security mechanisms, and we will talk about the security mechanisms in this presentation. We will consider what kind of security models are present in mobile OS, what kind of threats are present, why and how should we protect ourselves. There are three levels for the threats. There's a physical access, network access, and ransomware code implementation. The physical access can be separated into jailbreak attacks. Networks can be related anything to the network. And if we consider traditional operating system, desktop, mobile operating system, they have different angles of attack, because mobile devices obviously are more mobile compared to desktop. And when you walk around with this device, we are passing gigabytes of traffic through the network. But in order to be compact and try to fit this presentation within an hour, we will only speak about untrusted code implementation, because untrusted code implementation is the end point. Well, obviously, not considering the physical. If we consider different operating system and security mechanisms, we will compare them to Android and iOS, and we'll see what they have in general, what they have in common, what's different, and how it's developed by Open Mobile Platform. Security Mobile Database has the model of multiple agreement model. It has three interaction points: user, platform, and developer. And not a single code can be run. It won't be available on a device if at least one of these points, at least one of those three parties, would veto the code or access to the device. So, how do they reach an agreement, those 3 points: user, platform, and developer? From the point of view of a developer, this is provided by signing a developer. They sign their own application and they give their approval to publish in an official app store. Without the signature, this cannot be done. And they also undersign their code, which can be validated by the system. In terms of the platform is isolated from those two other parties by providing API. It delineates the area of influence. It provides specific containers where it's run in order to befriend users and developers. So anything connected with running the code is taken care of by the platform. Anything connected to security and running secure code. In terms of the user, it's a little bit more complicated, because when using mobile operating systems, a user is at the head. And speaking generally, users decide if the application would work or not and what kind of access they would have. But from the platform perspective, it has the right to limit some functionality or users' activity if they consider this functionality or these actions too risky, or maybe they're not yet ready. If we consider this from the iOS operating system, the foundation obviously is the technical principles like isolation, working with signing, with understanding the code, allowing the code to run, working with some basic signatures. But Apple puts more emphasis on the closed loop. Android provides more air, but Apple takes away all the air from the platform. They have the same mechanisms, but you cannot install any application which was not downloaded from the official App Store. Originally, Apple did not have an App Store. That App Store appeared because of a jailbreak, and then people created an App Store, Apple App Store, because of that jailbreak, and they moved all the applications to that store. It means that that application cannot work with some not signed code. Not a single random page from web resources cannot be loaded. The application cannot get into the store. The only point of access where it can be installed, if it's not pre-moderated, if it's not undersigned, if it does not have a certificate from the developer. Without all of this, or any of this, it's not possible to use IOs in order to develop the ecosystem. So what happens in Aurora OS? Speaking about the general security model, it's just general for all the operating system, because it's very hard to move the basic principles around. The basic principles are there for a reason. They are needed to protect the mobile devices, which are used dynamically, but there are some differences. One of them, for example, is that the current defensive mechanisms, they are out of the box, and there are some additions. In addition, the content is validated in the sense that for Apple, they have dedicated moderators. When an application goes uploaded to the App Store, but for Aurora OS instead, this happens on the device, not in the App Store. If an application does not qualify certain rules, it won't run. Isolation, containers, signatures are used too. And in more details, for all the layers of the model, first of all, it's a key point of signature by developer. I will tell later why it's a key point. It has to have a signature of the run files, which will be checked by the system, both at the time when it is run and both at the time when it's launched. The content has to be validated. API has to be allowed within the system because it separates into different levels and layers, and different types of developer signatures define different access to the system. Just like in Android, the platform, the system, can limit the access of different APIs if they consider them to be dangerous, and this is within the database. And there is a great emphasis put on the protection of personal data of the users. Based on this, we will consider an additional key which is used besides developer's key. This is a key for user or exploiter. This is the exploit key. For iOS, this is one of the more useful things. If nothing can get into the system or is very strictly validated, then the probability that some untrusted code or malware will get into the platform will decrease multiple times. The same applies to OS Aurora. There is an emphasis on the closed loop. So what was before? The second type of signature was used, the user signature that allowed for the closed loop for a customer, because the main point was to work with B2B businesses, B2B segment. And like any application get into the App Store, the same could be applied what kind of application would get into their closed loop. So for example, Russian Railways would close their key, then no other application cannot get into the system bypassing the RGD or Russian Railways approval. So this is the reason why they have this ecosystem for business-to-business segment. When we are talking about general security measures, they are very similar. So we consider the details under the hood of technical part, like using containers, validation, and signature, and especially signature, how they affect this closed loop. The database for the applications for each of the processes has an isolated ecosystem, has an isolated environment, and it runs trusted code. At least it is considered trusted if it passed the first line of defense. Then not just the application is signed, its internal content is signed too. Then certain defensive mechanisms could check it at the level of the nucleus. The content signature is checked at the nucleus level, and the application signature is checked by the application services. And when we consider what or who checks the signature and why they even do so, there is a subsystem for defensive measures which consider extensive attributes which are restored on the files when the application is installed, and it's validated by the developer signature, which is attached to the package. It blocks the run of untrusted code, which either does not have current signature or the signature was compromised. And that's why the developer signature is important. We also have the client signature, and system services are responsible for the client signature. It doesn't have any integrity measurements. Let's call it some ideal metric of trust for the application. And before talking about API, different sets of API, each developer key has a subset that allows to define the number of different APIs. This should not be mixed with the set of primary keys, because this is a part of the set when we're talking about primary profile keys. They have several types. The basic regular type for the main development. Extended is an extended version which you need for the API system, and for the majority of application can be considered risky. The number of profiles for AWS, ADM, antivirus to implement more specific solution to control the device, maybe for some kind of antivirus solution. And finally, the most recent profile, and we would like to talk about this profile mechanism, defensive mechanism, is for market. So if we are talking about signatures, and we put emphasis on this, then we should consider how it's implemented in the sense of its signature itself. What is undersigned, what undersigns what's considered to be undersigned by the system itself. If we look at the top, we have the gray area. It's the application, which does not have any information in the headline file, and it has specific content. The whole block is signed by the second block, which is called the developer signature. But developer signature is actually just a little bit more than a signature, because it has a certificate inside. It also has an additional option for key rotation. If for some reason your developer key was lost or compromised. Second signature is a client signature, is responsible for the closed loop interaction. It does not sign applications, but it signs the part of the developer signature, providing some kind of mark that let's call a customer, and they add this application, this developer, to the number of trusted sources to be run within the closed loop. If we go even deeper and step in a little bit away from the technical part, which I think we can delve deeper and deeper, but unfortunately we have time limitations, still we can separate the whole defensive mechanism into three main lines. The first line and the main line is, well, the main problem where the threats come from is running the untrusted code. The first line must be responsible for running this untrusted code. It uses the same mechanisms, understanding packages, dynamic control of the file integrity, and validating available API. If for some reason an application gets more deeper rights, or at least attempted to get those rights, if for some reason we were unable to prevent the launch of that application, then the second line, when the application is already on the device, they check all the accesses that device could have, that application could have on this device, then it is run, and we have to somehow protect it, somehow to delineate it. So all the applications, all the processes from an application work in an isolated environment. And this isolated environment is regulated by a number of different rights which were asked by the application. It also depends on the approval from the user, approval from the system, and approval from the signature, developer signature. There are also some limitations. There are constant checks of memory pages on the potential fit code presence, and all the data of personal data of the user are encrypted, just as well as the keys, in addition to limiting the access of the application to any sensitive data of the user. So all that is isolated. And finally, if we were not able to isolate the application and it was able to get through the isolation, now we have to act, we have to notify the user and somehow respond to the situation. The application that has some malware inside would want to take hold inside the system. And to do so, there should be some system services that define the integrity and key system components, and the components responsible for the defensive, like security key, integrity key, and trusted download, so that malware could not be rooted at that level, and then nucleus of protective mechanisms as well. But all that might become very shaky if we are not working with some B2B solutions with a closed loop and more totalitarian view on the application, how it should be installed, how it should be managed when we work with outer stores, third-party stores, and how stores react to this line defense and how to make it comfortable for users. Denis Glazkov will tell us the main idea how this problem was solved in our company.
Сторонние магазины приложений, глобальные,
third-party application stores,
расширяют очень сильно модель угроз. Почему?
They extend the threat model. Just as Dmitry said now, all the mobile operating system have their own secure system, but there is a non-zero chance that it has some vulnerabilities. And with the increased number of applications which you can install on your device, there is an increased chance that this vulnerability can be and will be exploited. We can have an example here. Say there is an iOS which was in closed loop for a long time because they always moderate applications and disallow some potentially threatening untrusted code would be installed in the system. And now they have the requirement from the European Union and they are told, we want you to have third-party markets.
появляется огромная
Initially, it
сфера
looks like
безопасности
there is a big
операционной
gray
системы,
area
и
in
это
the
приводит к тому,
security
что
of an operating system.
операционной системе
As a
приходится
result, this
подстраиваться под
operating
новые
system
реалии,
has to
под
adjust
реалии того,
itself
что
to the
доступ
new
больше не
realia
открытый,
that they
менять
do
свои
not have
принципы
the closed loop
безопасности
anymore.
и
They have to change their
разрабатывать какие-то даже
security
новые механизмы
principles and maybe even
безопасности.
develop new security
А,
mechanisms.
В принципе, так и получилось. Если
Well,
мы
this is what
вспомним
happened.
принципы безопасности, который назвал
If we
Дима
remember
в
the
слайде выше,
mechanisms, security mechanisms
там был
mentioned by
такой
Dmitry
принцип, что
before,
установка только
it
из
had
App Store.
one of them that they had to
Замкнутость среды,
install
тут самым
applications
первым
only
пунктом под
from
ним
App
я
Store.
имею в
And the
виду то,
closed
что
loop
Apple
of the system, I mean,
очень
but by
жестко
saying this, I
контролирует
mean that
список приложений,
Apple
которые могут быть
strictly
установлены на
controls the
iOS.
number of applications which can be
И
installed on
небольшой
iOS.
спойлер, в принципе, ничего не
And
поменялось.
just a little
Они сделали
spoiler,
свой
nothing
новый
really
механизм
changed.
таким,
They
что, в
created their
принципе,
new
просто
mechanisms so
теперь
that
можно устанавливать не только из App
now
Store,
you can install
но
application
от
not just
всех
from App
принципов
Store,
не
but
отказались.
they still
В итоге
remain
ситуация оказались и мы.
faithful to all their
У нас была
security
задача в
principles.
Aurora
The same
5
applies to Aurora
стремиться к тому,
OS.
чтобы
In
у
Aurora
нас
version
был
5,
глобальный магазин
we
приложений в App
wanted
Store.
to have a general App
И с
Store,
концепцией
and we wanted to
подписи
use the
эксплуатанта
concept of client
можно
client
считать, что
signature.
глобальные маркеты у нас не работают. Давайте
We can
представим,
say
да,
that global markets don't work. But now let's imagine
человеку на предприятии выдали
that
телефон.
a person
Этот телефон,
has
он
a mobile device, they work
привязан к
somewhere
эксплуатанту. Что
on
это
an
значит? Что
enterprise,
на
and
устройство
this
можно
device
устанавливать
is
только
tied
те пакеты,
to a
на которых
client.
есть
What it means?
дополнительная подпись
It means that
эксплуатант.
they
Можно
can
считать такая печать.
install only
Как бы
those
вот эти
applications that
приложения
have a
можно.
client
Что
signature
произойдет,
with
если
some kind of
мы
stamp?
установим глобальный маркет,
But what would
где
happen
эти
if we
пакеты не
install an application from a global
пакеты в
market
составе этого
where these
маркета
packages
не
in that
подписаны
market
чем-то
do not
дополнительным?
have this additional signature
Маркет
like a
просто
client
будет
signature?
бесполезным. Ни
Well,
один
the
пакет не
market will be
установится.
useless. Not a single package would be
И
installed.
это приводит к тому, что и нам пришлось
As a result,
пересматривать
we
свои
had to
механизмы,
re-evaluate
принципы, и так
our
появилась
principles
в
and
Aurora 5
mechanisms.
новая
As a result,
концепция
we
доверенных
had a
источников.
new
Это
concept
можно
of
считать
trusted sources.
перерождение
We
подписи
can consider
эксплуатанта.
this rebirth of the client
А,
signature.
Перед тем, как проектировать новый механизм,
Before we
мы
started
поставили
working
себе
with the
цель,
new
что мы не
mechanism,
хотим ломать
we decided that we do not
предыдущий
want
механизм. Мы
to
очень
hack
сильно
the
хотим
previous
сохранить
mechanism.
и по
We
максимуму
want to
улучшить
maintain this and maybe
предыдущие
improve it as
возможности
much as
создавания
possible, the
замкнутого
previous
контура,
capabilities working in the closed loop.
но еще дополнительно
But at the
убрать
same time, we
недостатки
wanted to remove the
предыдущего
problems the previous version had,
подписи
especially the
эксплуатанта.
previous
Из
mechanisms
них можно
working with the
перечислить
client
это
signature. For example,
неявная привязка
not
устройства к
clear
эксплуатанту, то есть после
tying of a
первой
device to
установки
the
пакета
client.
с
So, for example, when the first packages with an
на
additional signature
устройство
were
можно
installed,
устанавливать только пакеты с дополнительной
then
подписью.
only
И об этом
applications
пользователь
with
никак не
additional signatures
уведомлялся.
can be installed on the device,
Во-вторых,
and the user were not
эту
notified
привязку
of this.
можно было
Second point is
отменить
that this
только
tying
полным
was
сбросом
able to
устройства.
be revoked
Ну и
only by the
в-третьих, мы
full
хотели,
reset of
чтобы
the
этот
device.
механизм
And
позволял
third
все-таки
point,
делать
we wanted this
создавать
mechanism
глобальные
to have
маркеты
global,
на
to be
операционной
able to
системе
work with
Aurora.
global markets for the operating system
Как бы мы
Aurora.
хотели, чтобы это выглядело.
So, how
Допустим,
we
пользователь
wanted
купил
it to look
устройство,
like? For example,
установил
a
себе
user
глобальный
buys a
маркет, все
device,
хорошо,
they install global
пользуется,
market, everything works well,
пришел
they use
на
it,
предприятие,
and then they
его
get to an
подключили
enterprise,
дополнительные
they get
источники,
access
откуда
to
можно
additional
устанавливать
sources
приложение.
where you can download
И
this
в
application
последующем,
from.
например, в
Later,
случае обнаружения,
maybe
что
when
в какой-то
it is
марке
found
сломались
out that in
зловреды,
some market there are some
этот
malware
источник
application,
убирался из
then these
доверенных,
sources would be
и
removed from the trusted
устройство уже
sources.
нельзя было бы
And
установить
then the
пакеты
application
из
will
этого
be able
источника.
to be installed from the packages from that source.
В чем плюс? Так как у нас цель была сохранить
What's the advantage?
возможность создания замкнутой среды,
In actually fact, we wanted to keep this closed environment and the structure of the signature remains, and the previous Aurora 4 packages were signed by the user's signature still be operational. There's reverse compatibility, but additional signature is not called the user's signature, but it's called the source signature. And what does it look like in practice? In actual fact, now the device may have a few users trusted signatures. Now they are called sources. A few trusted sources where the user actually permits the trusted package installation.
На устройстве могут быть пакеты только из доверенных источников.
The device may only have the trusted sources packages.
Какого-либо доверенного источника.
When a certain trusted source is deleted, we say that we no longer trust one of the sources. We are being warned that the applications will be deleted. But the point is that the device cannot have applications installed from the non-trusted sources, untrusted sources. The signature is mandatory. In an extreme emergency, the packages may be installed without additional signature, but only
управлять источниками может только администратор. Почему мы так сделали? Потому что
in the certain run of things.
на B2B рынок.
Nowadays, we are focused on B2B market.
Где основное направление такое, что покупаются устройства.
With the main trend shown as follows: the devices are purchased, the sources are selected from where the applications can be installed. For example, it's a closed store from the closed contour, which is working for the user, and it's given to the user who installs the applications, which allows to maintain this model. What else is interesting here and this new concept is that we trust the source of the application, but not where the application was installed from. Unlike an Android, where any app may install the packages, and when a certain application is installed, you're being asked, would you allow the file manager to install this application? It's not working like this. In our case, we trust the signatures that are on the package. If the user puts its seal or their seal on the source, saying that they trust this source, and it doesn't really matter how this gets onto the device, whether it will be installed from a flash drive, it will be copied from a computer or downloaded from a site, it's the same source of the application. Market API was developed to develop for global markets, and basically it has everything to install packages, open apps, and track the operations you introduced, etc. There was a very good note from Dima that we have separate profiles for developers. We believe that the stores of apps must be the stores for apps. Not every solution can be installing such apps. So therefore, we have the standalone profile of the developer, key and a standalone agreement that must be signed by the user before they start working with the market. Another funny thing, in 1 year, together with the iOS engineers, we were tackling the same task, moving away from the closed app stores to the global app stores. In that same year, we introduced additional API for global stores development. But the most interesting thing was that the task was the same, but the output was different. Let me quickly explain what Market API looks like, and then we'll go to the most interesting part, what iOS did and what we did, and what are the differences. Market API, it's either C++ library, because all of the apps are written on Qt, or dbus interface, which uses RPC protocol, which is needed if we would like to use that API in non-C++ apps. It can do everything that market needs. Install the apps, delete the apps,
только то, что
run the
нужно
apps,
знать маркету. Например, там какая текущая
and some
версия,
information
чтобы
about
понять,
the current
есть ли обновление
version,
или
the
нет.
running version, to understand whether the
И, в
update is
принципе,
needed or not,
получение статусов активных операций или статусов
and getting the
операций, которые
status of
завершились,
active
когда
operation
маркет,
and
например, закрыли.
completed
Вот, такое
operation
тоже
when
бывает.
the market was closed.
Давайте к
Such
самому
things also
интересному.
happen. Now let's move to the most interesting part.
Кто смотрел, что такое Marketplace Kit?
Who checked
Ладно,
Marketplace
хорошо,
Kit?
значит, это будет небольшой такой
Okay,
инсайт.
it's going to be a
В общем,
quick
два
insight.
решения,
There were two
которые, по
solutions
идее,
here
решали одну и ту же задачу.
that were tackling the same task
Marketplace
in
Kit —
actual
это
fact.
решение от Apple,
Marketplace
тоже
Kit
для
is an
разработки глобальных
Apple
магазинов
solution
приложений. В чем же
for
мы
development
похожи?
for the global
Как я
stores,
уже и
for the
сказал, для
global app stores.
разработки глобального магазина приложений
What
под
makes it
OS
similar to
Aurora
us?
нужен
As we develop
определенный
the app
ключ
for
разработчика с профилем
Aurora
market, который
OS,
выдаем
we
мы.
need a special
Потому что мы
developer's
считаем,
key with a
что
market
все-таки
profile.
маркеты — это
We
необычное
distribute
приложение,
this
они
because
несут
we think
небольшую
that
угрозу
market is a
безопасности,
special
и
app
мы
and
не позволяем
they pose
каждому разработчику
cybersecurity threat, and
писать такое
we do
решение.
not allow every
Apple пошла
developer
таким же
to write
путем.
such a
У них
solution.
для этого есть
Apple did
отдельное
it
право,
just
которое
the
нужно
same.
запросить у
They have a
Apple, чтобы
standalone
вообще
right
начать
to
даже
be asked from
разрабатывать
Apple if
и
you
использовать этот
even want to
API.
start developing
В
apps
принципе,
for
в этом и
them
похоже.
and use that API. That's what makes us look
Также у нас
alike with them.
используется разрешение,
We
чтобы
also use
ограничивать
the
приложение от
permission to
Market API.
limit
Если пользователь его не
the app
принимает, то Market
from
будет
getting
не
into
запуститься. У Apple чуть
your
другой подход.
device.
Они что делают?
Apple uses
Они
a slightly
просят
different
подтверждение каждой
approach. They would
установки.
like you
То
to
есть
confirm
всплывает окно,
each
и там
installation. So
спрашивается,
there's a pop-up
хотели бы ли
window,
установить.
and it says whether
Тут
you
начинаются
agree to
отличия.
install or not. And this is where the differences
Так
start.
как мы, давайте начну с Apple, да? Они
So I'll start with
очень
Apple.
хитро сделали. Они
They did it in a very
сохранили
tricky
закрытый
way.
контур.
They
Им сказали,
maintained
нам
this
нужны
closed
сторонние
contour.
магазины приложений.
They
Окей,
said,
хорошо. Но
okay,
эти
if you
сторонние
want
магазины
the
приложений будут работать через
third-party
наш сервис
app stores,
Apple Store
they will
Connect.
operate through Apple Store
Централизированный сервис,
Connect,
где
a
Apple
centralized
проводит модерацию
service
приложений.
where
И если
Apple
кто-то им не понравится, они
moderates
просто его
the
не
apps, and
принимают,
if
и, естественно, такое
they don't
приложение
like
в
something, they just don't
сторонний
accept
маркет
it,
даже не попадет.
and this app will never
По идее, ничего
ever
не
go
изменилось.
to the
Вот,
third-party
просто
market.
будет еще одно
Basically,
приложение, которое
nothing
умеет
changes. There will be
устанавливать
just
пакеты.
one app that will be
У них есть
capable of
жесткое
installing
требование к бэкэнду,
packages.
как
They
должен
have a
быть
very
реализован
strict
бэкэнд
requirement for
стороннего
backend,
маркета. У нас
how
таких
the
требований нет,
third-party
и
market
поэтому
backend
мы, в
should be
принципе,
arranged.
позволяем
We don't have such
делать все
requirements, so
централизованные
therefore
магазины
we are
приложений.
allowed to run
Но в плане подписи мы с ними тоже
decentralized
совпадаем. У нас это
application
дополнительная подпись на
stores.
пакете. У
We
них
have an
немножко другой
additional
механизм. Там
signature on package where
получается
they
стороннему
use a
маркету
different
дается
mechanism.
уникальный
A third-party
ID-ключ,
market is
которым он
given a unique
подписывает
key,
GVT-токен
which is
для
used
каждого
by
разработчика. И этот
to sign
GVT-токен
the GVT
позволяет
token.
разработчику
The GVT
выгружать
token
свои приложения
allows the
в
developer
сторонний
to
магазин.
upload their apps
Ну,
to
по
a
сути,
third-party
это
store.
одно и то же, как
In actual
дополнительная
fact,
подпись.
it's the same. It's used as an
И
additional
что хочется
signature.
отметить, Market API
And
уже
what I would like to
проверен
point
временем.
out is that
В Aurora
Market
5
API
появился
has been
Rustore,
tested by time. In
который
Aurora
успешно
OS, we
работает
have
и доказывает, что
Rustore
концепция
that
верных
works
источников,
quite
она
well,
работает,
and it proves that the
и
trusted
можно
source
использовать
concept
просто даже
works,
в закрытом
and
контуре.
you can use this in the
Это
closed
еще не все. Концепция
environment.
сейчас развита на
Now,
базовом уровне.
this
Но
concept
есть куда расти.
is
Например,
developed on a basic level, but we have some room for improvement. We may add
у нас сейчас прорабатывается механизм аттестации.
a mechanism
Например, можно
of
сделать
assessment.
отдельный
We are
пункт
currently thinking
аттестации,
about it and
отдельный
testing it.
фактор
We may have a
аттестации, как
separate
разрешена ли установка
standalone
пакетов без
assessment
подписи
factor
источника.
whether you
Например, если
allow
подпись,
to install the
если это разрешено,
unsigned
например,
packages. If
отклонять какие-то
such
банковские
installation is
операции,
allowed, you
можно
may
и говорить, что ваше устройство
decline some of the banking
Что еще можно придумать?
operations,
Например,
and
групповое ограничение
you may
политик
prompt the user
для
that their
определенных
device
источников.
is not
Например, мы
safe.
понимаем, что
And you
вот
may
этот вот,
limit the
источник
policies
какой-то маркет, он
for a
немножко
source.
мутноватый, но там есть
For
приложение,
example,
которое
a
мне
source
очень
may be
нужно. Но на
very
всякий
dodgy
случай я
looking, but
отрублю для
you may
таких
have an
приложений микрофон,
application
камеру
which you
и
have there, but
все,
for such
чего
an app,
вы боитесь.
you may want to disable a
И
camera,
также
use
сейчас у нас
microphone use, and everything which
систем
is very
приложения.
dodgy.
То есть данные приложения, они распределяются между пользователями, но по
And
сути
we have
приложения,
the
если не дать
applications
одному
per
пользователю, оно
user. If
удалится
you
у всех.
delete this application from one user, it will be deleted from everyone because we operate in B2B markets. The per-user trend is much better in this case, so we'll be developing the installation of the apps from trusted sources. In the end, I should say that Aurora OS is the state-of-the-art operating system, which has nicely branched, powerful security system, and the Aurora OS is actively growing, developing, and it reacts to the ecosystem challenges and some new and it absorbs everything which is new. Thank you very much for listening. Don't forget to evaluate this presentation of mine. Okay, let's just say thank you to Dmitry and Denis.
У нас с вами традиционно есть QR-код, по которому вы можете
Obviously, we have a QR code here, which you may use to
есть
evaluate
QR-код, по которому вы можете
this
задать
presentation.
свои
You have a
вопросы.
QR code, which you may
Давайте,
use to
наверное, пока мы
ask
собираем
the
вопросы из
questions.
зала, будет такой кринжовый вопрос от меня.
We are collecting
У
questions
меня
here,
есть
and we have
основное
this cringy
iOS-устройство, но есть
question.
еще дополнительное
I
на
have an
Android.
iOS device, but I
И
have an
на
additional
этом
one
Android
which
стоит
runs
NetHunter,
Android,
как
and it
базовое
has
дополнение к Android.
NetHunter as an addition
И понятно, что нужны root
to
привилегии для того,
Android,
чтобы его
and
поставить, для того,
obviously you
чтобы
need to have
пользоваться.
root
Вот
privileges to
представьте,
install
вопрос
it
такой.
and
Если
start to
бы
use
к
it.
вам
The question
пришли
here
конечные
is,
пользователи, ну вот
if
end-users
end
или
users
какие-то
would
ваши
come up to you
B2B
or
клиенты,
some of your
что бы
B2B
вы делали,
clients,
если бы такой запрос
what
пришел?
would you
Может быть, он уже к
do
вам
if
приходил.
you had such a request? Maybe you already had it.
Да, чтобы был
To get more
root на
privileges for the user. Yes, to have a root
конечно.
on your device.
Спасибо. Можно ли на
Thank you.
устройствах
Next
с
question.
Aurora, как на некоторых Android
Can an Aurora device, a device that runs Aurora, do it just like with Android? Publish the documentation to unblock the loader, how to get root rights, etc. Is it possible to do with the Aurora OS? Officially or unofficially? Of course, you may risk losing the warranty, the guarantee, but can you basically get root rights? As far as secure boot, you cannot unblock the loader. If it's a box solution, you cannot change much there. Nothing can be changed there. But in terms of growing privileges, we provide the MDM API. That's the API where you have more or less privileged operations. It's true. And a little bit more is allowed there than to the regular user.
Чтобы получить вот этот дополнительный MDM доступ, что нужно?
So to get this additional MDM access, what exactly should you do?
MDM доступ, ну как ваш коллега сказал.
To get this additional access, like a colleague said, an additional MDM access, like it was said previously, it has different subgroups with the developer's signature that expand the basic functionality, regular, extended, and the MDM profile that gives access to the profile for MDM. So MDM is an app. It shows that if it has access to MDM, it may have a little bit more than the obvious. Yes, that's in terms of security. It would be strange if a calculator device would have to have the API access to manage. But anyway, if we talk about more extended rights, like root access and getting privileges in the B2C segment, the developers, the users must have extended debugging access. In this case, you may deactivate the developer's mode.
При активации режима разработчика
But when you activate the developer's mode, you immediately understand that root access appears, and
но они уже не гарантируют, что
you cannot be guaranteed that the first two
он будет исполняться в любом
bullet
случае.
points will be
Если какие-то механизмы безопасности
executed. If there are certain security mechanism
то здесь уже мы переходим
is applied here for changes, we move to the final echelon where the user is being told, please do not break the security settings, please keep them like they are. But we have such a possibility
у нас
there.
появится NetHunter на Aurora OS. Вот, и
After
я
this
обязательно этим воспользуюсь.
reply, we will have a
Так, у нас
NetHunter
есть
on
время на
Aurora
примерно
OS, and I will definitely use it.
вопроса.
We have
Приглашаю
time for
Александра Болдырева,
approximately
который
3 more
зачитает
questions. Alexander Bolderev will read them, by the way.
Никиты Аврелина.
Question from Nikita Avrelin.
Aurora OS из исходников.
Can I assemble Aurora OS from the source code and put it on my smartphone? Or you have special hardware requirements?
некоторый образ операционной системы и прошить его на устройство.
You can use source code
Исходники.
and you can put it on your device. Not all of the source materials, not all of the source codes are open.
Совершенно точно без мощностей собрать.
So to assemble it in an image of the system, it's not possible for a B2C user, but for B2B users, we have third-party vendors and adaptations
Помогают и расширяют
that can also help extend
отличных решений от базовой
this solution and make them different from the basic version, the standard Aurora solution.
Хотя я тоже сказал, например, я не уверен, насколько это еще известно.
For
Но,
example,
как минимум, одно из таких устройств
one of such devices
Понятно, спасибо.
will support such an
Еще
installation.
вопрос от Дмитрия Р.
One more
Правильно
question
ли я
from
понял, что при
Dmitry.
публикации в магазин модерации приложения человеком нет?
The
Вместо
moderation
этого происходит
is
модерация
not provided
на
by
устройстве.
human
Если это
beings
так, почему
in
это
the store.
безопаснее?
The moderation is done on the device. How come it's
Да,
safer?
то, что у нас валидация при установке происходит.
Oh, you mean the validation when you install the
Потому что у
application?
нас нет централизированного места.
That's because we don't have the centralized space like iOS.
Можно им или
And
нельзя.
Apple thinks whether
У нас B2B
you can
сегмент.
do that or not. We don't have it. We are a B2B segment, and every closed environment may have their own market. We cannot just interfere and say you can't do that and you should do this. But when you install it, you take a look at the application and you say there's something wrong going on, we will not let you install that. We don't have this centralized place where we can put it the way it's allowed, not allowed for those people.
Вдогонку тоже от этого
And you'll follow this
Дмитрий Р.
from
Как при выдаче ключей
with the next question
разработчикам
from Dmitry.
магазина приложения вы проверяете
How do you
добросовестность
check and
разработчика?
verify the validity of the developer when you handle out the keys,
Блоков доклада, который в силу
whether
времени
it's a trusted
не
developer or
успел
not?
уместиться, по поводу...
I should have mentioned that on the slides about giving out the keys, where we get them from,
Валидируется, что
and how the keys are validated, and how we
во-первых,
put
если
the
говорить
developer in the trusted
все-таки первую точку
group.
вхождения, это как получить ключ.
Well, the first entry point is getting the key, actually.
Просто, ну, OpenSSL-евские механизмы по
You use the open SSL mechanism in terms of the generation of the key. The developer
генерирует ключ,
generates the key using certain parameters. Then,
он генерирует
using the current key,
на
they
выдачу
generate
сертификата.
the request
Этот
for a
запрос
certificate
отправляют уже в ОМП
generation,
На
and that
основе
is
этого вопроса,
sent to
генерируется уже непосредственный
OPMP,
сертификат.
and then a certificate is generated.
Добросовестность разработчика
How do you check the validity of the developer and whether they are trusted one? In terms of business solutions,
люди, сидящие сверху, выписывающие
it's
ключи.
the people who
Вот это действительно условно.
provide the keys do that. For example, this is Kaspersky, indeed, that's VK, indeed.
Валидация
But for the ordinary users,
в целом не требуется.
No such strict validation is required. Our security is built as follows. We try to prevent the execution of the code rather than not giving the developer to develop their tools for the platform.
Да, у нас есть еще один вопрос из зала.
But you need to select the best question and also listen to the final question from the floor. Thank you for your presentation. In the beginning, you said that you have SMD under the bonnet, but don't you think that it's too dangerous? It's a huge monolith. Have you ever thought about something, run it OpenAC or a homegrown solution? And does your code become friendly with GPL in Linux and systemd?
Я могу про systemd ответить.
Systemd.
Это
I can speak about systemd.
использование systemd.
The use of the systemd
Мы исторически
goes back to history, because historically we start from Nokia, then self-MISHOS, and then we
Вот это так исторически сложилось.
started changing
Мы
selfish.
используем systemd, и там уже
Historically,
очень много
we
сервисов.
use systemd. We've been using it for a long time.
Разработки чего-то более
So
легковесного есть.
thinking about something more lightweight, as you put it, well, yes, we've thought about it, but changing this will take a long time and a lot of money. With the change of the systemd, a couple of services may
аккуратнее быть, и мы не сильно пока спешим.
go berserk and everything may go wrong. So we don't push this. And this is another related question about the safety mechanism in Linux. Have you thought about using this or maybe using a parmer additionally?
Чего?
A parmer or something like that.
Нет, не используем.
Ну, вопрос хороший, на него есть конкретный ответ, что
It's a good question with a specific answer.
ресерч в этом направлении как продолжался, так и продолжается, пока
We
мы
keep on researching this,
не хотим, наверное, включать
but
Linux
we don't really want
в
to
рамках текущей
initiate
операционной
Linux
системы и в
because
рамках настройки
with the
Linux
current operating
есть
system
некоторые спорные моменты по
and with the
выставлению
Linux solution, there are some tricky points
по выставлению политик и их
for
динамического
setting the
изменения.
policies and dynamically changing the policies. So that's why we wouldn't want to do that.